Well, let's go over to Hong Kong now. Now, China has sent summons to senior officials from the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong. This after a newspaper published pictures of Joshua Wong, a leading pro-democracy activist, with a U.S. diplomat who has been identified as Julie Eda. Beijing has called for an explanation on the reports that claim American diplomats are in contact with the protesters, saying U.S. should stop interfering in cities' affairs. In fact, the denunciation has come as U.S. became the latest country to issue a travel alert to the territory. Meanwhile, U.S. has launched a strong protest after personal information of its diplomat describing China as a thuggish regime. A U.S. official has said that this is not how a responsible nation would behave.
I don't think that leaking an American diplomat's private information, pictures, names of their children, I don't think that that's a formal protest. That is what a thuggish regime would do. That's not how a responsible nation would behave. Releasing any of that personal information of an American diplomat is completely unacceptable. That's not a protest. That's what a thuggish regime does, and it's unacceptable.
We spoke to Joshua Wong, and this is what he had to say about the meeting with U.S. officials and China's interference.
Chilling effect was generated by how American diplomat was and her family was strongly blamed by pro-Beijing newspaper and media. But it's also point out how crucial and critical of Hong Kong's protest. And now is the summer of discontent, and our strike must get more allies around the world to support us. She will just provide misleading narrative and ignore our voice. Finally, where the Hong Kong people can get back our right to a free election, it is not depends on Carrie Lam, it depends on the attitude of Beijing. And it's time for Beijing to modify its hardline policy to Hong Kong, stop its hardline suppression.
After Hong Kong, now Russia has accused U.S. of fueling and influencing protests in Moscow. Moscow has alleged that last Saturday's protests were backed by Washington. Russian police forcibly detained nearly 800 people attending a protest in Moscow last Saturday. They were demanding free and fair elections. Authorities had labeled the demonstration as illegal. Moscow summoned a representative of the U.S. Embassy over what it said were calls to take part in opposition protests. U.S. and Europe have criticized Russia's crackdown on a series of protests for fair local elections. Rallies have seen thousands arrested and the police clashing with protesters. Last week, the U.S. Embassy issued a demonstration alert on its website ahead of their protest, giving time and location of the march, along with warnings to avoid the area and avoid demonstrations. Now, these details given by the U.S. Embassy about the protest prompted Moscow to point at a U.S. hand in the ongoing protests.